to him. Shall we do the Saraswati Vandana? We'll just wait for a while and then we'll begin with the Saraswati Vandana. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Vijay? Good morning, sir. Professor Aneja also has joined. We're just waiting for Rajkumar, sir. Our principal, Professor Pawan Kumar Sharma also has joined. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Professor Tapan Basu.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning to everyone.
Hello, good morning, sir. How are you?
I am fine. Good morning.
Hi, Raj.
Good morning, sir.
Hi,
Hi,
Hi, Tapan.
Sir, बहुत congratulations, sir.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning,
Sir
sir.
अनिल अनेजा जी बहुत बधाई हो आपको.
Shukriya, Paramji. Thank you very much, Paramji.
वो honor that as he took
नमस्कार
over
सर.
and-
प्रोफेसर राजकुमार जी नमस्कार सर.
से जहाँ सर बोलेंगे.
नहीं है, कॉन्फ्रेंस पैदा है, लेक्चर तो हो चुके हैं.
हाँ, पहला कॉन्फ्रेंस है सर.
जी हाँ.
So we are really honored to have all of you on
Yeah,
board.
thank you.
Subhadra, can we ask shall we begin with the Saraswati Vandana? Let us begin with the inaugural now.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
most of the presenters also have joined in.
Sure, ma'am. Ritika, can we have the Saraswati Vandana?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ritika. I will just proceed on to the welcome. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the conference on Resistance and Revolutions, the Politics of Marginality, organized by the Department of English, Dancing Evening College, University of Delhi. I extend a hearty welcome to our esteemed chair of the plenary session, Professor Tapan Basu, who's retired from the Department of English, University of Delhi, and our plenary session speakers from the Department of English, Professor Sharmishta Panja, Professor Rajkumar, Professor Anil Aneja, and Professor Crystal Devidausan. I warmly welcome our respected principal and patron, Dr. Pavan Kumar Sharma, and express our sincere gratitude for his constant support and encouragement. Welcome, dear colleagues, faculty members, paper presentators, and participants, our student volunteers, students from other colleges, and friends. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this conference organized by the Department of English, Dalsing Evening College, University of Delhi. Before I speak of the theme of the conference, I would first like to share the story of how the conference came into being. As the department deliberated on the possibility of conference in one of the departmental meetings, the idea and the concept note for the conference came from my young colleagues, and we are very glad that the initiative has given birth to the conference that we are all part of this morning. I thank Professor Abha Singh, our teacher in charge, for giving us the responsibility to organize the conference on behalf of the department. Bell Hooks, the well-known African-American author and critic, in a preface to Feminist Theory, From Margin to Center, writes, and I quote, "To be in the margin is to be part of the whole, but outside the main body," unquote. She goes on to discuss how being on the margins gives one, and I quote, "a sense of wholeness impressed upon our consciousness by the structure of our daily lives provided, a mode of seeing unknown to most oppressors that sustained us, aided us in our struggle to transcend poverty and despair, strengthened our sense of self and our solidarity," unquote. Although she's talking about the feminist movement in America, from the experience of being a black woman in America, it resonates with the purpose and vision of our conference. The concept of marginalization recognizes the myriad ways in which individuals and groups are culturally, socially, economically, and politically excluded, and the developmental, democratic, health, and ethical consequences of that exclusion. Marginality as a concept and lived reality is a dynamic and ever-changing terrain. As social, cultural, and political systems and perceptions shift, new marginalities are created every day. The center and the margins shift as the dynamics of power structures change. With that arises the challenge of academic spaces to accommodate and create inclusive spaces for these voices and experiences to emerge, become part of the discussions in the mainstream, and be acknowledged. A two-day conference is perhaps not enough to explore and deliberate on the many layers and dimensions of marginality. However, recognizing the importance of universities as repositories and generators of thoughts and discourses, and acknowledging the role of academic institutions like ours to create spaces and platforms for fellow academicians and researchers to come together and think freely, we have organized the conference. The conference will explore the many dimensions of marginalization with special emphasis on class, caste, gender, disability and identity formation, but also beyond, where there are valuable insights and lessons to be learned. With these few words, I welcome each and every one of you to the conference on resistance and revolutions, the politics of marginality, and it is my prayer that we will all be able to make it a success, and we will be well informed and thoroughly invigorated by the end of the two-day conference. I would now request our respected principal, sir, Dr. Pavan Kumar Sharma, Professor Pavan Kumar Sharma, to address this August gathering. So over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Biswas. Good morning to all the esteemed speakers and our participants. Esteemed speakers, dear colleagues, faculty members, students, and the well-wishers. A good morning, a very good morning to all of you. On behalf of the Dalsing Evening College, I extend a very warm welcome to the conference on the theme, the politics of marginality. Of course, the full theme is Resistance and Revolutions, the Politics of Marginality, organized by the Department of English of our college. I extend my heartiest welcome and gratitude to our plenary chairperson, Professor Tapan Basu, and our esteemed speakers, Professor Sharmishta Panja, Professor Rajkumar, Professor Anil Aneja ji, Professor Crystal Devdasan, for taking time out of your busy schedules to talk to us, to speak to us, and provide us a kind of proper background of the uh, theme of this conference to us today as we start this 2 days long conference. I would also like to thank all the presenters from different colleges and universities across the country for participating in the conference. Your participation has added much warmth and meaning, and I hope that these 2 days will bring forth insights and discussions that will add depth to our understanding of marginality. I congratulate the conveners of the conference, Dr. Broti Biswas, and Dr. Madhuri Chawla, and a very special to our TIC of the Department of English, Professor Abha Singh ji, for organizing the conference on the theme that requires much deliberation and discussion at the present times, and for the hard work and effort that they have put in, our teacher coordinators for working tirelessly to put things together for the conference. A special thanks also to our student volunteers. I know that how much work they have put in during the last 10 days or so. That is why that we are in a position to have a volunteer team who are the backbone of every event that the college conducts. Their talent and hard work are much appreciated. I hope that conference will enable us to not only gain insights into various aspects of marginality, but also enable us to generate empathetic discussions that will contribute to building more inclusive communities. I hope that by the end of the conference, you will not only be all of us will not only be well informed, but also be encouraged to engage and act. Thank you everyone, thank you all, and I especially I have to also to mention that it's a 2 days conference, and the themes, the papers which have been included in this will really be, I think, in some I mean the some of the papers are pioneering papers, if I have to say so, because I have not come across such topics so far. So thank you everyone, and I hope that this will be a very fruitful exercise even during these corona times. Thank you everyone.
Thank you, sir. Let me now take the privilege of introducing our chair and speakers for the plenary session. We are very honored to have Professor Tapan Basu as the chair of our plenary session. Professor Basu retired as professor from the Department of English, University of Delhi. His teaching and research interests have encompassed Black literature and Dalit literature. The two MPhil courses which he offered for several years centered around the exploration of the theme of marginality in literature in the Indian and the United States context, namely Outcasting Caste, the writings of B.R. Ambedkar, and of Race and Class, the self-positioning of the African American writer in the civil rights era and beyond. His publications include Translating Caste, a critical anthology of writings on caste edited by him, Listen to the Flames, texts and readings from the margins, co-edited, and an English translation, My Childhood on My Shoulders, co-translated. This is the Shivraj Singh Bechen's autobiography, Mera Bachpan Mere Kandhon Par. Thank you, Professor Basu, for making this conference meaningful with your presence. We're very fortunate to have Professor Sharmishta Panja as one of our plenary speakers. She has been the head of the department of our University of Delhi in Department of English, has been acting director and joint director, Institute of Lifelong Learning, University of Delhi. She has been dean, Faculty of Arts, and head Department of English, University of Delhi. She has taught at Stanford University and IIT Delhi. Her areas of interest are early modern studies, Shakespeare in India, Indian feminism, and visual culture. She has an exclusive list of book publications in these areas and published articles on Renaissance studies and feminism in international journals. She has been a fellow at the Salzburg Seminar, a visiting professor at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla, and has been awarded a fellowship at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., USA, and a Mayor's Fellowship at the Huntington, USA. She has been the president of Shakespeare Society from India 2008 to 2014. She is a member of the steering committee of the International Group of Early Modern Scholars, Theatre Without Borders. She is also the founder member of PEHEL, Delhi University Women's Support Group, formed in 2005. We are very honored, Professor Panja, to have you on the panel. We also want to acknowledge and thank Professor Rajkumar for accepting our invitation to be the plenary speaker. Professor Rajkumar has been the head of the department, and he has been teaching for nearly 2 decades in the university. During his tenure, he has been taking on various administrative roles as convener and member of several committees in the university. His areas of interest include Dalit literature, autobiographical studies, Indian literature, post-colonial studies, Odia literature and translation. Has He has published numerous books and academic papers in these areas. He has also been a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. Thank you, Professor Rajkumar, for adding value to the conference with your presence. We're also glad to invite our present head, Professor Anil Kumar Aneja, as a plenary speaker. He has a long and distinguished career of more than 30 years in academics. Presently, he is the head of the department in English, University of Delhi. His areas of interest include 20th century fiction, disability studies, Indian writing and English, translation studies, diaspora studies, human rights, literature and communication, and technology applications. He has also a long list of publications to his name. He is also a nodal officer as well as of the Grievance Redressal Officer for the Persons with Disabilities and the Officer on Special Duty at the Equal Opportunity Cell, University of Delhi. And he is an activist in the sector of disability rights, and he has been the president of All India Country Union from 2016 to 2021. He was conferred the National Award for the Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities by the President of India in 2014. In 2017, was presented with the Achievers Award by the Indian Eye International Human Rights Observer. He also conferred the State Award in the category Best Individual Working in the Field of Social Work by the Government of Delhi, and the prestigious Rustam Mewonji Alpalwaiwala Memorial Award in 2020 by the National Association for the Blind. He has also been conferred the prestigious NAB Sarojini Triloknath National Award 2019. Welcome, sir, and your presence will make us learn more from your experience and your from interest. Last but not the least, we are honored to have Professor Crystal R. Devadausan as one of our plenary speakers, a Cambridge Nehru Scholar for her PhD. Professor Crystal at the Department of University. She has also served as the head of the department. She taught at St. Stephen's College and served as the head. Her publications include Out of Line, Cartoons, Caricature, and Contemporary India, and Reading India, Writing England, The Fiction of Rudyard Kipling and E.M. Forster. Her most recent publication in the field of visual politics is the chapter Obedient Daughters and the Deployment of Graphic Stereotypes with Professor Shomishta Panja and Shishendra Chakrabarti. She has edited Word, Image, Text, Nature and Time in Literature and the Visual Arts. We heartily welcome you, Professor Devadausan, and thank you for being here with us. And I personally thank all our plenary speakers for having accepted my invitation to take time off from their academic and administrative activities to grace our conference and be part of our inaugural plenary on marginality. Thank you. I hand over the mic now to Professor Basu to take charge. Thank you and welcome once more.
Well, good morning to everybody. Am I audible to everybody?
Yes, sir.
Good morning to everybody. I want to begin by thanking Bruti and the organizers of this conference on resistance and revolutions, the politics of marginality, for giving me the privilege of chairing this plenary session. This is not the first time that the Dayal Singh Evening College has given me such an honor. back in 2018, Broti would remember, the Department of English of the college had invited me to address a session at another marginality studies seminar, Sharan Kumar Limbale's The Outcast and Dalit Resistance. I find this preoccupation with marginality studies particularly praiseworthy because in a democratic society, such as we always claim to be, it is important that we not only take into account but pay specific attention to the rights and requirements of those who inhabit the fringes of social belonging. This morning session will take up four aspects of marginalization in society: women as marginalized citizens through Professor Sharmista Panja's paper on feminism in India, Is It Dead or Alive? A paper on disability as a factor of marginalization by Professor Anil Kumar Aneja, Professor Rajkumar's paper on caste and marginality, and finally, Professor Crystal Devadasan's paper, which promises whether children constitute a class. All this Broti has just told us are eminent scholars in their own fields. Professor Anjay is the current head of English Department of English at Delhi University. Each of the other speakers, coincidentally or not, has also occupied the position of head of the department in their own time. We look forward to the presentations from this galaxy of speakers who will be inaugurating this seminar session. We will start on feminism in India. Is it dead or alive?
Thank you, Professor Basu. It's good to have you here amongst all of us. Many thanks to Broti and other members of the conference committee, and to TIC Professor Abha Singh, to the principal of the college, for giving me this opportunity to be a plenary speaker at this important conference. Tapan has pointed out how marginality seems to be a key focus of this college, and I think that is very praiseworthy. It's also a sign to young scholars that this is an area in which they may, fruitfully engage their energies. So the title of my paper is Feminism in India, Alive or Dead? I'll just take you through a very brief history, a sort of capsule history of feminism in India. And then I want to talk about four contemporary movements that to me present a new performance, a new sort of performative expression of feminism in India. And I want to mention right at the beginning that my work is indebted to the research of Mary John, Rekha Pandey, Susie Tharu, Lata Mani, Partha Chatterjee, Ashish Nandi, Irfanullah Farooqi, Tejaswini Niranjana, Flavia Agnes, and Shorbani Guho Ghoshal. So feminism, as we all know, is a political stance of someone committed to changing the position of women and bringing about equality. In India, the first phase would be between 1850 and 1915, the age of the social reform movements. We have the abolition of sati, women's education, the outlawing of child marriage. Home and family and marriage were seen as critical institutional sites for social reformers, be they reforming sati or conjugal rights or marital rape. And the theoretical grid was that of society, tradition, and culture, and not so much politics. Women were not the subject, as Mani points out, but the ground on which the debate on India came to be written. Through a prolonged inquiry into the status of women in ancient India, the nature of tradition was fleshed out. At the end of the 19th century, the social reform agenda is taken over by the discourse on nationalism. Nationalism is, as we all know, a cultural discourse, not just a political one. It included the women's question because women were seen as bearers of Indian culture and tradition, symbols of sovereignty for the browbeaten male colonial subject. This is, of course, Partha Chatterjee's idea. And so ideas of the new woman, the sphere of the home, conjugal relations, domesticity, religious practice, how Indian women differed from their Western counterparts, how the middle class Hindu woman differed from women of other castes and other classes, these were the focus of ideas about women in this period. The new woman was an educated helpmeet of her man without ever threatening his masculinity or his domain. But what critics have pointed out is that this is a deeply Hindu patriarchal construct based on scriptures, where social issues become political with the challenges posed by child marriage, the age of consent, conjugal violence. And through this discussion, the notion of women's rights emerges, but it's the rights of a certain kind of woman, not all women. Bankim Chandra Chatterjee writes his very revolutionary longish essay, Shammo, Equality, 1879, which is full of radical ideas which unfortunately he later repudiates. He argues, why should daughters not inherit their father's property? Why should there be double standards for men and women? Why can't widows remarry if they so choose? This is, these are debates that are being aired as early as 1879. Now, the most problematic terms for the first generation of feminists at the turn of the century were culture and modernity. And feminism came to occupy a conflicted position because feminism was seen to be on the side of modernity, but the normative woman, Hindu, middle class, was seen to be on the side of culture. Thus, the national response to colonialism led to an opposition between with feminism as something alien, according to Niranjana. Now, I'll skip through the second phases, the period of accommodation, the period of crisis, the period during the independence movement where women were fighting shoulder to shoulder with men for India's freedom. I'll now go on to a landmark event, which is the 1974 Status of Women's Commission report. The report was called Towards Equality, and it presented an absolutely dismal picture of women in India. In political, economic, and social fields, women had an inferior status. This report presented alarming statistics on health and nutrition issues, on employment, on political participation, despite progressive legislation and constitutional guarantees. They, in fact, said that women's condition has declined and regressed from the time of the independence movement. This report also raised the important question of the Uniform Civil Code. We have a uniform criminal code in India, they said, but no uniform civil code, cutting across gender, caste, and religious lines, affecting issues like divorce. They also pointed out the strange anomaly in contemporary Indian society. Secularism, science, and modernism are all highly valued in independent India, but not gender justice and equity. Post-independence, gender issues, they argued, were subsumed under poverty alleviation schemes. So with this sort of path-breaking report, you also have a blueprint and a national plan of action for women that follows. Another important point in the history of feminism in India is the setting up of women's studies centers after the first national conference on women's studies at SNDT University in 1981 and the UNESCO meeting on women's studies and social sciences in Asia in Delhi in 1982. SNDT, the conference said that women's studies is not just an exploration of women's lives or issues related to women, but a critical instrument to improve knowledge of social reality and how it may be clouded by male biases. It brought to the forefront the fact that women's lives, their living realities, are hidden and omitted from mainstream discourse, and women are excluded from centers of power. Now, as we all know, the institutionalizing of women's studies and women's studies centers, the entrance of women's studies into the academic curriculum have not always been a sign of reform or of going forward. Often these women's studies centers are sites of staid, conventional, even regressive activities. They present a token recognition of women. And often the women who run them are co-opted within patriarchal discourse. In the 90s, you have another interesting sort of development, which is the development of militant women's organizations like the Rashtra Sevika Samiti of the RSS, the Durga Vahini of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, and the Mohila Agade of the Shiv Sena. The Bombay Surat riots of 1992-93, the Gujarat violence and upheaval of 2002, in these events, these women were vocal. They rose to the defense of men guilty of murder, rioting, illegal possession of arms, and even rape. So, that was a sort of disturbing event in the 90s. Now, I go on to take up two terms that Mary John uses. She says that she prefers the term post-national to globalization, which, of course, as we all know, brought about a reduced economic role of the state, and for the pursuit of so-called global integration, it actually presented a sort of numbing homogenization and an annulling of important differences and distinctions between countries. So she says, in the post-national age, there is a rise of religious minorities, sexual minorities, oppressed castes and religious affiliations. The marriage and the family become the subject of protest and debate. The debate often centers around violence against women, and dowry murders and rape are critiqued in a different way. We move away, she says, in the post-national age, from seeing the woman as a victim with a focus on the individual or the private sphere, to a critique of patriarchal ideological structures of state, caste, and community biases that bring about this violence. The concept of the domestic, of the public, and the private become reconstituted in this period. For example, the critique of dowry now revolves around the concept of Indian modernity rather than merely family relations. It also takes into consideration capitalist energies, consumer spending, the aspirations of the middle class, the legal recourse open to women, and even the battle between women. Now, why does John prefer the term post-national to post-colonial or globalized? The nation, she says, particularly the supposedly unified homogeneous nation, is no longer the frame of reference. The nation also becomes the subject of critique. It is fractured along caste, communal, and religious lines. Muslim women, Dalit women, lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgenders, all of these people question mainstream Indian feminists, just as the third wave feminists and the black feminists question second wave feminist assumptions in the West. Sexuality, particularly gay, lesbian, and trans rights, which were not part of public debate earlier, certainly became that, especially with the repeal of Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, the anti-sodomy law introduced by the British in 1870 in December 2013. So, and even things like the private everyday lives of women, their choice of career over family, their choice to remain single or childless, their choice to end their marriage in divorce. These struggles were not earlier seen as part of mainstream feminist discourse, but definitely with the explosion of social media post-2000, these have become part of feminist discourse. And we have new activist subjects, greatly aided by social media, the Me Too movement, the Triple Talaq movement, Pinjra Tod, my own organization, which I set up with my students, Pehel, and Shaheen Bagh. Now let's look at Triple Talaq. Now Triple Talaq, Muslims, as we know, are the largest minority group in India. They're governed by Muslim personal law, ostensibly under Sharia law. All schools of Islamic law claim they're based on the Sharia. However, they vary in ijtihad or interpretation of these sources. Triple talaq or talaq-e biddat is men's immediate, unilateral, and irrevocable repudiation of their wives. A man can pronounce talaq 3 times or write the word 3 times, and that is sufficient to divorce his wife. Instant triple talaq is most egregious. The words may be spoken in a fit of rage, sent by speed post or WhatsApp, and still hold good. Some influential Hanafi jurists and some schools of Islamic law governing Indian Muslims consider triple talaq repudiable. Others favor different divorce proceedings. All schools of Islamic law favor that a man's decision be considered revocable for a period of 3 months in order to work towards a possible reconciliation between man and wife. Now, only a small minority of Muslim women have the right to unilaterally dissolve their marriage. They are those women whose husbands have given them the talaq-e-tehweed, the delegated divorce right in their nikahnaama or marriage contract. Now, among the women behind the fight against triple talaq is Shaira Banu, who suffered domestic violence, torture, demands for dowry, multiple abortions, inadequate medical care at the hands of her husband Rizwan Ahmed. In 2015, she was given triple talaq by speed post while visiting her parental home in Uttarakhand for medical treatment. She was separated from her sons. A year later, she filed a petition in the Supreme Court seeking ban on instant talaq, nikah halala, and polygamy. She declared them unconstitutional and as a violation of 4 articles in the Indian Constitution. Article 14, equality before law. Article 15, non-discrimination. Article 21, right to life with dignity. And Article 25, right to freedom of conscience and religion. Based on this petition, Modi filed an affidavit against triple talaq. Banu's case was joined by 5 other women seeking a ban. August 2017, in a landmark verdict, the Supreme Court struck down the practice by a majority 3:2, declaring it unconstitutional. The Modi government drafted the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Marriage Bill in 2017. It was passed in the Lok Sabha in December of 2017, but as we know, it wasn't passed in the Rajya Sabha. The Congress and the left argued that this singled out Muslim men for punishment, made a matter of personal choice or personal law, divorce, a criminal law matter, and was part of the BJP's pre-election strategy. Zakia Soman and Noor Jahan Niaz, co-founders of Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan, argue against the politicization of the law that criminalizes triple talaq. Soman and Niaz argue the PSC judgment has not dissuaded men from pronouncing triple talaq. Women can file cases against their husbands, get custody of their children and maintenance. Earlier, just 3 months iddat maintenance was required. But how will a jailed man pay maintenance? The ground reality, they said, is that very few women want to see their husbands behind bars and are eager for a reconciliation. While the Hindu Code Bill was passed 60 years ago, the Muslim Code Bill is yet to happen. There's little democratic engagement between feminist activists and Muslim women for the most part. Religion is seen as anathema by many liberal feminist activists, and yet we have to admit that religion plays a major role in the lives of Muslim women. Pinjra Tod. Pinjra Tod is a collective of women students and alumni who sought to make hostel and PG restrictions less arduous for women. They said that the concepts of safety and protection can't be used to curb women's movements and their liberty. They presented the UGC guidelines of the sexual harassment committees, and once the DCW saw the Pinjra Tod statement on this, they repudiated the Jamia order of 2015 that said that women students could not return later than 8 p.m. to their hostels. The movement then spread to colleges in DU, Ambedkar University, DTU, and from there to IIT Roorkee, Punjab University, and institutions in Lucknow and Calicut. December 2016, there was a multi-city protest organized by Pinjra Tod called Bas Teri Meri Chal Saheli to protest the 2012 Delhi gang rape. Their aim was for women to use public services at night to reclaim public spaces for women. And there was simultaneous protests in Allahabad, Kolkata, Darjeeling, Pune, Bangalore, Patiala, Chandigarh, and of course Delhi. In February 2017, Pinjra Tod protested against the Kamala Nehru Drama Society not being able to use words like bra and panty in a festival organized by the Sahitya Kala Parishad. They performed an ode to bra, panty, and Sahitya Kala Academy. They hung bras on the walls of Sri Ram Center, protesting the stigmatization of women's innerwear. February 2019, they faced criticism from minorities, from SC/ST women, saying that Pinjra Tod was elitist, a Savarna Hindu organization, not looking at the rights of minorities or those discriminated against on grounds of race, caste, and religion. We are no longer going to be fascinated by your sisterhood circles and tokenism inclusivity. Pinjra Tod countered this charge. They came onto the national stage on 23rd May 2020 when Pinjra Tod members Devangana Kalita and Natasha Narwal, PhD students at JNU, were arrested in connection with the Delhi riots under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Kalita and Narwal had opposed the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019. The group issued a statement. We strongly condemn this hounding of democratic activists and students being carried out by the state. But even though they were granted bail in June 2021, they were not released till December. Who said that while her daughter was free, there were still many languishing in jail without a trial for many years, and she hoped that somebody could help them. Now, PEHEL, the Delhi University Women's Support Group, is something that I set up with my students in 2005. It ran for 10 years. We organized annual PEHEL Melas where we had Nukkad Nataks on women's rights. In arts faculty, we organized annual student seminars. We had talks on the domestic violence bill, on the repudiation of the sodomy bill. We had sort of panel discussions with administrative members of the university for international students and students from the Northeast. We had a questionnaire that we gave to students who were in PGs, and we collected data on PGs, and this was published in Hindustan Times. We had a Facebook page. We even had for a while a counseling phone service run by members. But what I found was that, I don't think that Delhi University really needed this movement, because if it did, then it wouldn't have sort of ground to a halt after 10 years. I really thought that in many of these activities, we were preaching to the converted. Some of the most meaningful things that PEHEL has done is reaching out to Karamcharis. What I wanted was, rather than a divided platform where you have students, teachers, and Karamcharis in 3 separate watertight compartments, I wanted an organization that could address the rights of all 3. And so we had our student volunteers talk to the Karamcharis in Delhi University. We called them for a session. They aired their rights. But again, you see, where do we take this information to? We presented it to the authorities as we presented the material on the PG accommodation for women, which was really awful. The landlords were being intrusive, high rents were being charged, all kinds of horrible things were happening to these women, and we suggested that the university try to do some kind of sifting of the kind of accommodation that was being offered by PGs, but nothing came of these events. So anyway, that was PEHEL. Now the last thing I'm going to talk about...
Professor Panjab, may I interrupt you? Would we wind up as soon as possible?
Yeah, sure. Shaheen Bagh. Now Shaheen Bagh, as we know, is the protest set up by the women of this area called Shaheen Bagh against the CAA. And what I want to say is that, and again, I'm referring closely to the arguments of Farooqi here, is that there is a new protest performative setup in Shaheen Bagh. What we have is a group of, we have a location that is not the usual location for protests. We have people, a wide range of people of varying age groups protesting for the first time, and they are protesting in a space to which they belong, and they are protesting exactly about that fact that they are being told they don't belong in a country to which they belong. And through this protest, we hear, as Gopal Guru points out, the we of the constitution, meaning we the people rather than just we the citizens. And despite the extremely severe winter of December and January, where one of the protesters even lost her infant son, you have the women carrying out their strike out in the open. And excuse me, when I visited Shaheen Bagh, what I was struck by was not the speeches that were being held on the stage, but this group of women who were sharing food. Volunteers were bringing bananas and vegetable biryani. They urged me to, share the food with them. What you have is a sense of extreme solidarity and this inclusion of anybody who comes. I was a mere bystander, but the inclusion of people within a community and creating this new narrative of inclusion against an exclusion only on the grounds of law. Okay, so to go back to that notion of post-national versus national, in post-national feminism, we have minority voices, be they sexual or religious minorities, be they Dalits, local and regional inflections rather than a homogeneous pan-Indian identity, a critique of the nation which provides not service but coercion, not empowerment but domination, not dialogue but violence. Rather than see the individual as a victim, we see the social, political, and economic forces that bring about suppression and domination. We see a new language of resistance, a new protest performative through Me Too or anti-triple talaq or anti-CAA movements. And they bring into debate older questions about the role of women, particularly women belonging to the minorities. Now, C.J. Ramana at the NLU convocation some days back talked about the lack of activism among today's youth, the absence of student leaders who then became national figures, which he saw as a sign of an ailing democracy. So I want to end by saying that the role of the younger generation is crucial. History is in your hands. You write the future of feminism in India. You will keep it alive and well, or let it disappear without a trace. The choice is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Panja. That was an extremely lucid, very well structured and thought-provoking presentation. I myself learnt a lot about the different phases of Indian women's movement, and it brought us up to date right up to Shaheen Bagh. And I'm grateful for that, and I'm sure the students and faculty gathered for the session have learnt a lot too. Now, I have to ask the organizers for a piece of advice. Should we have questions after each paper? Do we have time? Or should we have all the papers? There are 3 more, and then set the stage open for questions. Ruti, what do you suggest?
It's your choice, but I think we can have all the papers and then open the whole panel for Q&A. Is that okay, ma'am?
Broti, actually, I have some work at the university, so if I could...
So then we can take, I think then let us take Q&A.
I suggest...
And can I request all of our panelists to please keep their cameras on and all our faculty so that we can take a snapshot?
I suggest we ask for 2. We open the stage for 2 questions at the moment.
Yeah, no, sir, no problem. No problem. Please, all of you just, the faculty present also, can we just take the pick? Student coordinators?
Yeah.
Can you just on your...
Okay, just one request. If you take a screenshot, please warn us beforehand so that we are alert.
Yes, sir, we just... Crystal...
Broti, my camera is on.
Oh, sorry, I'm seeing somewhere else. I am also a little techno.
No, we
Yes,
can see her. Yeah.
yeah, I can see. I was
And
looking somewhere else, and
Yeah.
um,
the names
yes,
of
So
the
give us proper Android because you are going
yes.
to put it all
Can
on
we take the?
the.
Sir, we're taking this now. Madhura, are you taking it or the bachas are taking it?
We'll take it, ma'am.
Hi, just take the snapshot. Aneja sir, we're taking the snapshot. एक दो ले लो, है ना? Done? Are we done? Thank you, sir.
Yes, I'm done. Thank you.
In that case,
Yeah, we can take the
on the chat
questions.
box?
If anybody wants, they can put it on the chat box, or we can just
Yes.
openly just unmute yourself and ask the question.
No questions? In that case, please hold on to your questions. We'll come back. The next presentation is by Professor Rajkumar. It's on caste and marginality.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Professor Tapan. Good morning to everyone. I begin with maybe that thanking Dr. Brati and of course that her team, Dr. Madhuri Chawla, Professor Avas Singh, and the very presence of maybe that Professor Pavan Kumar Sharma. I also welcome my co-panelists, Professor Sarmishta Panja, Professor Anil Neza, and Professor Crystal Devadas, and my colleagues, and dear friends. I must, that congratulate the college because as Sarmishta and Tapan, both of them, they have already pointed out that they are seeing is, that for last few years, maybe, that trying to organize conference centering around marginality and of course, that the other kinds of maybe, that subject that will definitely give a big, maybe, that not only, that a chance for the youth to, that remind themselves their roles, as Professor Sarmishta has already pointed out, that today the conference is titled Resistance and Revolution, the Politics of Marginality. This is a very significant, the topic. As we all know, I begin with the whole idea of, that there are several kinds of marginality, as we all know. Four of us, we are trying to, of course, that deliberate on different kinds of marginality. But I will try to extend by saying that particularly to the youth, that we have several marginal groups, be it caste, class, ethnicity, religion, region, language, nationalism, race, disability, and gender, among others. And as this 2 days conference, that there are too many papers are going to be deliberated upon on different marginal groups. And I have already congratulated Brati that it looks really very impressive. And I'm, sure that with modern education having critically conscious, some of these marginal groups, they are going to write new revolution. And that's why perhaps the focus of this conference is resistance and revolution, which is written in red. So it has, that its own symbol and significance. So congratulations for that also. My topic is caste and marginality, as we all know, that this is a very general, broad topic. So what I'm going to do is I'll try to assess, the caste marginality, forgetting of course, that others, and I'm very happy that the conference began with the whole idea of gender marginality, because as Indian historians, they talk us, they tell us actually that caste and patriarchy in Indian context particularly emerge simultaneously. And 50% of women, that which constitute India's population, that which Swarmista has already, that pointed out, need to be, that taken forward. But what I'll try to do in a, that in my lecture, try to deliberate on the idea of, that caste marginality, as I have already stated, not just in Indian context. I'll also touch upon, that how caste has traveled to Asian countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. The time may not be, that available for me. Also, caste has traveled over the years, that what, that we have seen on post globalization in Europe and America, that everyday life of maybe Indians and non-Indians in Europe and America also is being now, that particularly in diasporic writing, if you see that there is also caste emerging in a big way. So time may not be available, that to deliberate on all this. In my lecture, what I'm going to do precisely to ask some of the questions. The first is, that what exactly is caste? I'm sure, that the audience they know about, but I'll try also to defend my position by stating what exactly is caste. What role does it play in everyday life of Indians? What are the caste markers that we generally associate with the caste marginals? Can we think of caste equals? I'm using this term, caste equal, if not caste annihilation. These are some of the questions that I'll try to discuss in my lecture. What exactly is caste? Let's, that I begin with the whole idea of giving you some feedback on, say, the recent book by Suraj Yangide, Caste Matters, which was published way back in 2019, as recent as 2019, argues how caste plays an important role in everyday life of every Indian. I emphasize every Indian. That maybe, that young men and women, they may say, where is caste? And I'll try, of course, to justify it by saying that caste matters a lot to every Indian, whether you believe or not. Giving a title to the introduction to his book as Caste Soul. Look at the title, Caste Soul. All our souls are caste, that. Motifs of the 21st century, Yangde thus writes, and I quote him, caste is understood through various prisms, thus making it the most misunderstood topic of dialogue on or in India. Caste is thought as a synonymous with reservation, Dalit, Adivasi, manual scavenging, poverty, Dalit capitalism, daily wage laborers, heinous violence, criminality, imprisonment, Rajput, Brahmins, Baniyas, Kayastha, OBC, etc. These are some of the many variations that bear witness to the everyday nakedness of caste. However, what remains undiscussed and therefore invisible is the multiple forms in which caste maintains its sanctity and pushes its agenda through every aspect of human life in India. Caste plays an important role in every facet and over an unthinkably large domain of public and private life. Unquote. The sanctity Yangde talks about in the above is the division of caste based on what sociologists call purity and pollution concept. And accordingly, caste divides people, as we all know, into first two broadly the two broad categories is upper caste and lower caste. This is, that, but this is not the only, the division. The hierarchy is permanent and there is no social mobility. So once a Brahmin, always a Brahmins, once a Dalit, always a Dalit, even after death. Caste further gets mutate. I use the word mutate, that's something biological term, because caste, not just a biological term, of course, that I will go to the extent by saying that this is more of a social construct. So it gets muted by becoming subcaste, sub-subcaste, and you can, that go on expanding how many sub-subcaste. Though there is no recent caste census, and the last caste census was done in 1931, hope people know about, it is believed that Indians are divided into more than 5,000 caste categories, which are also called communities. Sometimes, that the sociologists, they say that 5,500 communities. And each caste or community looks like a little republic following meticulous caste rules and regulation. I say little republic. And that you can also try to understand about what this little republic is. These rules and regulations are sanctified by the religious scriptures. be it Vedas, Upanishad, or Dharma Shastra. And according to my research, there are more than 220 Dharma Shastra. The most important Dharma Shastra, as we know, in Manu Shastra, Manu Samhita, Artha Shastra, Kama Shastra, and many others, of course. Therefore, even if these rules are archaic, they remain eternal, immortal. Here, maybe that there are several sociologists who have already that pointed out, and one most important sociologist, as we all know, is Louis Dumont, whose famous book is Homo Hierarchy, who for the first time points out that had there been no religion, caste would have disappeared by now, but that has not happened. And sociologists like Gail Ombit and many others have already, that stated all this. Interestingly, the term caste derived from a Portuguese word called casta. I don't know how many of us we know, which means a group. This Portuguese word suggests that the group could be birds, group of birds, animals, or insects. But in Indian context, as we know, it is a social division of people. If we go by pages of Indian history, and as we, that we have read Indian history, that more or less as a student of maybe, at primary level or secondary level, during Indus Valley civilization, we see that there was no caste. There was something called class. But in the Rig Veda, for example, I will try to draw your attention to 10th mandala, Purusha Sukta. All of a sudden, we hear a division of people into 4 varnas. No, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. I may, that try to draw your attention that the Purusha, P capital, tries to bring out, that very many people. So from mouth came, of course, that Brahmin, from arm, Kshatriya, and from thigh, Vaishya, and from feet, Shudra. These are all metaphors as we have to interpret Indian society according to the division of labors. Later in the post-Vedic time, Varna replaces Jati. And all of a sudden, there is a new addition to this, that category, 4 Varna category, called Ati Shudra, who later are known as, that there are different names. I'll, that if there are questions, I'll be able to, that answer it, but I'm just trying to touch upon some of these maybe concept. Panchama, for example, and each category will try to be defined in a particular socio-historical context. So every term that I'm using has its own, meaning, and also maybe, the history. So Panchama, for example, Antyaja, Abarna, Rakshasa, Asura, Untouchable, Harijan, Depressed class, Scheduled caste, up to, that may be during constitutional writing and maybe, that post-independence. And of course, that now all these terms have been replaced by the term Dalit, which is, that very, very revolutionary in its meaning as well as its practice. For example, all the other terms other than Dalit are being given by either upper caste or official or social reformers or the rulers. These are very interesting, that historically. But Dalit is a name given by Dalit themselves. And that's where there is pride, though there is militancy, there is radicalization, but there is, that most important thing, because we are also talking about revolution and resistance, the term Dalit also signifies dignity and self-respect for those who are known as the other in Indian society. Now, what is wrong with caste system? That could be the primary question that we have to ask. Caste rules become so pervasive. If I can give you some caste rules, you may not be able to, you may not be able to believe it. For example, say, that one constituency called the untouchable, who form maybe 1/6 of the Indian population, they not only became invisible in either that literary history or maybe society in general, they also became unapproachable, unseeable, unhearable. We have not heard about say Dalit till the coming of maybe that 20th century, or maybe that from the middle of 19th century onwards, till British came and that imparted education through Christian missionary. Otherwise, education, as we all know, was not available to Dalit, Adivasi, women in, of course, general. Now, now, what is most important about this, that idea of caste, that caste made, or caste rules made people, particularly the lower caste, slaves of upper caste. As Phule, in his famous book called Gulamgiri, talks about caste is nothing but slavery. And maybe that 85% people of India are made, that to work for Indian society as a whole. Wherever I go, I ask who makes roads, who makes railways, who make your clothes that you are wearing, who produce your food. This is, that irony of India. That the producers in India are not the consumer. So forget about poverty, malnutrition, that what is most important is that 85% people of India are considered low caste, and they were given what is, that considered to be menial and manual, that works. This is what, that people might say that this is division of labors, as Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi at one point of time, when there was a debate between Ambedkar and Gandhi, that Gandhi suggested at one time that Varna has to be there because it brings less competition, unlike, that the European society, but that is another matter. So the division of labors is not, that true in Indian context, because what Ambedkar at one point of time talked about is, that when we talk about division of labor, which is considered to be class, but in Indian context, class is not just division of labors, but division of laborers, because we try to put people into certain category. This makes Yangde, I'll again, that quote Yangde, that when he says, caste as a social construct is a deceptive substance known for its elemental capacity to digress from its primary motive of existence that governs this oldest system of human oppression, subjugation, and degradation. These are the three words that, that caste system carries forward: oppression, subjugation, and degradation. Originated in the Hindu social order, it has infiltrated all faith on the Indian subcontinent. That's why we say today it is not just Hindu India, but also, that we talk about Dalit Christian, Dalit Muslim, Dalit Sikh, Dalit Buddhist. So it has, the caste has traveled to all sphere of not only living, but also other religious, that groups. As old as the order of Indic civilization, the phenomenon of controlling human capacity, creativity, and labor has been core to its ideological performance, secured by strict legal order. Caste in India is an absolute sanction of the dominant class over the dominated, unquote. So caste is not just arbitrary, as we all know, because that caste meaning also exploitation, because that 85% people of this country who are considered to be low caste have to be slaves of the upper caste. But so caste is not just arbitrary, it is also antisocial, anti-scientific, anti-national. For example, that I'll try to bring here the idea of, that how caste divides people into several categories. So when I say anti-national, because when, that Europe talks about, say, Imagine Community, Benedict Anderson's, that famous book, imagine community because of maybe one religion, one language, one that particular maybe race. In India, it is not possible to come together because caste divides people into several fragments. It is also anti-scientific. There is no rationality behind the dividing people on caste line. It is also anti-social. So there is no fraternity, brotherhood is not possible in India. How much you try to think about that Indian nationalism. Therefore, from the very beginning, that Buddha was the first person to protest against caste. And bhaktis and poets, I will, that try to draw your attention to maybe few because time may not permit me. So, 1,000 years of bhakti movement, beginning from 7th century to 17th century AD. I will just draw your attention to maybe, that two or three people. One is, of course, that we must have heard about Kabir. Kabir talk about Prem Nagari. Amidst, that caste, class, and religious division, Kabir talk about Prem Nagari, love city, city of law. Look at, that. So in India, that if you try to love each other, maybe, that how does one love? That is the question. So Prem Nagari, Kabir, that emphasize often. Nanak is another, that person, Choka Mela, meaning there are several people, that I can talk about, but I'm fascinated by the idea of Ravi Das, that shoemaker by profession, and his term Begumpura. Begumpura, if you read, this is a city, not a village. That this is a city, unlike that Gandhi's ideal village. City where there is no caste division, no class differences, no gender inequality, and there is also no tax to be given to them. So Begumpura, the idea of Begumpura, that envisaged by a saint poet, Ravi Das, who was a shoemaker, and of course, Mira went to learn many things from Ravi Das, as that history has it. And in the maybe that beginning from mid 19th century, we have several what I call anti-caste lectures. Beginning from Phule, of course, Phule was the first caste debate into the public sphere. His contribution was great because that apart from writing Gulamgiri in 1873, he also instituted what is called Satya Sodhak Samaj. I always try to, that emphasize upon Satya Sodhak Samaj, truth-seeking society. And what is truth about Indian society, as Phule has talked about, is nothing but caste. And as I have already mentioned, caste is nothing but slavery. Phule and that his wife Savitribai Phule were the first people to institute school for untouchable boys and girls way back in 1854. That this was for the first time that untouchable boys and girls could avail education which was denied to them, particularly public education. 1854. Look at the that date. Never before that untouchables were allowed to go to public institution. And of course, Ambedkar took caste question not just that in the corners of India, but also to the world. I can give a number of that names because of paucity of time, be it Periyar, Narayan Guru, Bhimabhoi from Odisha, Mangura from Punjab, Achyutan that from UP, Harichan Thakur from Bengal, and several others. These are the anti-caste intellectuals. I wanted to draw your attention to that these anti-caste intellectuals emphasize on education, because education for Dalits is emancipation, freedom. Unlike the upper caste reformers, beginning from Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Dayanand Saraswati, Ishwarchandra Vidyasagar, to Gandhi, and in between too many, who never talk about education, at least for Dalits. Now, that way back in 1936, Ambedkar gave a call to annihilate caste. This is in the aftermath of Pune, the pact. Pune pact perhaps was a decisive moment in the history of India, because Ambedkar thought that there will be separate electoral system for Dalit, And he failed, of course, to convince Gandhi. Gandhi was adamant, and in 1932 there was a treaty between Gandhi and Ambedkar that finally, that considered to be, the Pune Pact. So after Pune Pact, of course, Gandhi had to begin what is called Harijan movement, as you know. So he started a weekly called Harijan, and also temple entry, and then finally, of course, that inter-dining, which, that many politicians, often you might have seen in newspaper, going to Dalit Basti, having, that lunch or dinner with Dalit, just for a Photoshop. Ambedkar wanted to bring a structural change, a structural change. I try to emphasize this. And that's why his first and foremost, that logic was to annihilate caste. Annihilate caste, he wanted to deliver this speech, of course, but this speech could not be delivered because he was too radical perhaps to critique Hindu social order. And that's why the Jat Pat Todak Andolan that wanted to organize this conference had to cancel. Ambedkar published, his lecture in the form of a book in 1936 called Annihilation of Caste. This is the finest ever book written on caste. After that, perhaps, that I don't find any kind of, logic. So in the book, in a crucial passage in Annihilation of Caste, he mounts a challenge to those who consider themselves as humanists. We all, that consider to be humanist because sometimes we are very radical and revolutionary in a platform like this. When it is conference and seminar, we, that we seem to be like radical. But in our private life, we are the same. Now, so Ambedkar writes, I just quote, that one passage. Caste is not a physical object like a wall of bricks or a line of barbed wire which prevent the Hindus from commingling and which has therefore to be pulled down. Caste is a notion. It is a state of mind. The destruction of caste doesn't therefore mean the destruction of the physical barrier. It means a notional change, unquote. So, that if we understand this statement of Ambedkar, what, that prevents people to be, say, that annihilating caste. Caste will not go, caste has not gone. So, Ambedkar, who stated that caste is nothing but endogamy, that towards the end of this book, he also stated that caste is nothing but endogamy. And endogamy basically, that is a convenience, particularly for marriages, that marriages between two communities maybe. As we go along, that caste has not annihilated or had not been getting annihilated. Every Sunday newspaper, particularly in a column like Matrimonial column, if you see, that hundreds of maybe, that marriage alliances are to be advertised whereby caste is being mentioned. I am so and so and I would like to marry. So caste has not, that disappeared yet. And there is no way perhaps, that it is going to be annihilated.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Raj.
Yes. Yeah, I'm just concluding. Yeah. As we see, caste has not been getting annihilated, rather it is getting strengthened with new liberalization and globalization. I'm sometimes reminded of when I'm driving on the road, you might have seen in two-wheelers and four-wheelers, the caste markers. I'm so and so, Brahmin, Kshatriya. Yesterday only I saw a, that motorbike writing Kshatriya at the back. So what is worrisome is caste atrocities are increasing day by day. As the data available with the Scheduled Caste Commission suggests, on an average, more than 2 Dalits are murdered and more than 5 Dalit women are raped every day. On the other hand, there are also a growing number of Dalit activists and writers who over the last 5 decades, beginning from Dalit Panthers, have been engaged in a complex set of political, institutional, ethical, and aesthetic practices. This is what, that I mean by Dalit literature and Dalit movement. And the idea of complex set of political, institutional, ethical, and ethical practices. This is to use the new book by Aishwarya Kumar, Radical Equality, for scripting a new revolution. Choosing a language of equality, please, that try to understand. Choosing a language of equality, the Dalit writers are rewriting the history, culture, literature of India by interrogating caste-mindedness of the upper caste, which in Gopal Guru's formulation is a radical rejection of rejection. I conclude, Tapan, finally.
Thank you.
To conclude, I quote a passage from Aniket Javare, Practicing Caste. This was published after his death posthumously in 2019. The title of this book is Practicing Caste. And that it addresses all of us, beyond this platform, of course. So please listen to it carefully. I quote from him. This is my conclusion. We are many. We are many, meaning, that those who are trying to fight against inequality. So it could be caste, it could be class, it could be gender, it could be nationalism, it could be disability, it could be, the children, it could be anything. So we are many. Our jobs is not merely to initiate social change without being vanguardists, activists, and leaders, but perhaps ever more importantly, to maintain social change through time and history. To think that we have a goal which once reached or our job is over. Social change needs to be permanently maintained and nurtured. We will have to keep changing. We need to think that we'll have become after the end of caste. Will we be good human person? This is what, that he asked question. Will we be good person? What we are going to do with the us, with ourselves. Thank you. Thank you all for your patient listening.
Thank you very much, Raj. I really liked your paper. It was an extremely thoughtful paper, very, very sensitive, very useful, particularly for the students in the audience, because you began by saying that most of us, particularly young people, believe that we have transcended caste. We've gone beyond caste. We are in a casteless. Just not true, as you yourself pointed out. It's just not true. Caste is very much with us, and it is time, I firmly believe, that caste is, people might find this objectionable, offensive. Caste, the discourses of caste has to be brought into our classrooms. Because unless we confront our students with caste, the reality of caste, the persistent of caste, as Anand Teltunde calls it, we will never be able to rescue ourselves from the banality of caste. Thank you very much. Now, if there are any questions, we can permit 2 questions for the time being and then move on to the next presentation. Please put your name on the chat box if you want to ask a question.
So, Tapan, there is a question. Devayana Nag has asked me questions. Shall I read it?
Yeah, read the question and read.
Yeah, so Devayana asks, what is the status of caste in context of just a minute. Yeah. So where is it? Yeah. Post-partition Bengal. Are migrant and refugee also discriminated on a caste line? Devine, thank you for this. That there are too many writings coming from Bengal. One is, of course, that one here, that definitely about post-partition, that incident felt by the refugee. Upper caste refugee were very nicely being, that rehabilitated in Bengal, giving them prime land, as we all know. But the low caste refugee were sent to Dandakaranya, as far as, that maybe, that Madhya Pradesh and many other places, and Sundarban, where, that Sundarbans, of course, that is a very unique place where tiger conservation was made, and The Hungry Tides by Amitabh Ghosh is a perhaps that account, literary account of how post-partition Dalit refugee who were trying to that get settled down were evicted by the Marxist government, Jyoti Vasu, that on the name of tiger preservation. Now, that there are too many accounts coming from Bengal Dalit writings, and one is, of course, that you might have heard about, maybe that the famous autobiography by Manohar, that uh, uh, Manoranjan Vyapari is one, that who has been writing about, that Amar Chandal Jivan. He has written at least, the three different accounts. One is fiction. The very, that idea of writing autobiography came first, Chandal Jivan, and then, of course, there are two or three different accounts. There are also lots and lots of, that writing coming from Bengal, that Brati, Momita Sarkar, maybe, that, and several others, that Sukanya. There are too many actually, the research who are working on. So, your second question, are migrant and refugee also discriminate on caste line? Yes. That is, that precisely what happened as I started telling you, that if they happen to be low caste, they were not just, that left to their lurch, because the government, the establishment, they did not bother actually about their rehabilitation. So even today, that the problem of this refugee and migrants continue. I think, that even today, what suppose, that they face in the everyday life continues because they happen to be from the low caste. So that will be my answer. Devayan. Any other question, if suppose, that anyone has, I'll be happy to answer.
Is there any other question? Well, if there's no other question, I just want to make a point in passing before I move on to the next speaker, which is that the significance of caste, as we've just heard, cannot be understated. We've seen it. I'm now formally outside the system, outside the university system. But in the last round of syllabus making, which the English department went through, it was very significant that writings on caste, writings about caste were in the eye of the storm. Okay. Writings, say, by Mahishata Devi or Bama, they were in the eye of the storm. I ardently plead with colleagues that, the next time round their syllabus making, FIUP is about to come in. Please ensure that some writings about caste, on caste, make themselves appear in the syllabus, so that students can cognize, students come to terms with the reality of caste constitutes their lives on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Tapan, there is another question. Shall I take it?
Yes, question.
Yeah. Sapna is asking in your line, whatever you have stated, Tapan, that thank you, Professor Rajkumar.
Please repeat the question and answer it, and then we'll move on to Anil's speech.
Yeah. I have been teaching Bhimayana for a couple of years, and sometimes find the refusal of a few students to understand the perspective of caste appealing. How does one sensitive reach out to such resistance upper caste privilege viewpoints in the space of a classroom? So, Swapna, there is no, that magic to bring them, that it is better that we try to, that make them maybe asking a few questions, maybe, that what are the caste privilege they have been, that receiving, and to make it interesting, that the first debatable topic is reservation, actually, that I always see that people just jump to the, that idea of reservation. So that could be one way, Sapna, to begin, that the whole idea of caste, maybe, that privilege, and let them maybe, that bring their account, so that maybe, that it could be further debated. So I fully agree with Tapan that classroom discussions are very important, because finally we are going to, that build up a nation, if at all, that we are thinking about, the classroom teaching as an extension of, that our societal, maybe, that contribution to a larger, maybe, that community, because I always think that, that classroom and community, they are linked together. So if at all we have to bring some the sensitivity among the students, we can always, ask them to participate in the discussion. Let them, that reject the whole idea of caste, but then the dialogue has to begin. It is not the rejection of, say, a course like caste and literature, that as that we found people resisting that we should not talk caste in literature. Let us, that begin to debate about caste, and that let there be, that very many viewpoints. That is the only way to, that bring the youth into a dialogue. So I think, Sapna, you have to undertake a kind of, that um maybe one that way of introducing is, you can begin with the whole idea of reservation. What is the reservation? How different constituency get reservation, and that is perhaps to begin the whole idea of caste. So that is what that my suggestion would be. I think that Tapan, that is what perhaps that at the moment. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Raj. Now we go on to the next presentation by Professor Anil Kumar Aneja. That will be on disability and marginalization. I, for one, need to hear this very carefully. I've worked on caste, I've worked on race. We just heard presentation on gender. In my opinion, and I could be ill-informed, disability, the discourse of disability and marginalization, concerns about disability and marginalization have.
Yes, sir. Could you join? Hanji, sir. Okay, sir. I'm resending the link. I think, sir, maybe I've joined ho ya. I think Aneja sir has just lost the link. I'll just resend the link to him.
Please resume the link and then I'll continue.
Ha. I'm just mailing it back to him. I don't know why he lost the link.
Wait, don't worry.
Yeah. In the meantime, if there are any other questions for Professor Rajkumar or Professor Panja, ma'am there, we can,
Sorry, Brati?
Continue. If there are any other questions, still you can join. We can take them.
I'm happy to answer if there are questions.
Yeah, while we are waiting for.
Yeah. Please go ahead. Anyone who want to ask any question, please. Question answer. Nebu.
May I ask something to Professor Rajkumar, sir?
Yes, please.
So this is Mridashmita. I'm just also enlightened by your deliverance. I belong to Assam, and you have mentioned about Dalit Christian, Dalit Muslim, and Dalit Hindu. I just have an observation. Like in Assam, sir, we do not have, this kind of caste variations at all. I just wanted to know your observation. Like we do not, have that kind of distinction in terms of Dalit ideology, sir.
Madhusmita, you might be wrong because we have Dalit writings coming from Assam recently. So maybe you know that West Bengal also claimed that they didn't have caste, you know, that for very long. But then, as history suggests, that Dalits not only you know that had a very bad time, they also mistreated by both you know that caste Hindus and also you know that Marxist establishment. You know that who think that there is no caste. You know that. So when we begin the whole idea of there is no caste, you know that either you are thinking about that the caste markers are not visible in the you know the public. Say what happens when you know that you go to worship in a temple. Is temple allowed to everyone? That is the question that immediately you know that you can think about. Are there intercaste marriages, for example? You know that if you say there is no caste distinction or there is no caste discrimination, whether anyone can marry anyone in Assam? There is the second question. The third question, of course, you know that is you know that what happens when we try to think about, say, organizing certain social you know that celebration. Do we invite everyone, irrespective of the community that we can think about? So these are some of the questions that you can think about, Midusmita. Meaning when you say there is no caste. Yes, Tapan, you want to say something?
I can see Anil.
Acha, Anil is there.
Brati, I think Anil come. Welcome, Anil.
John back. Thank you. Yes.
So should
Yeah.
I begin?
Yeah. So you can begin.
Okay. Welcome back.
If Professor Rajkumar, have you answered Mridusmita?
Yeah. I think you know that Midusmita has understood what my you know that point.
Okay. Sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Anuja sir.
Welcome back, Anil. I was introducing your presentation before you lost the link. I said that you know this is my keenness also to listen to your presentation because I've worked on caste, I've worked on race. We heard a presentation on gender and marginalization, but in my opinion, and perhaps I could be wrong, I could be ill-informed or under-informed, disability and marginalization is still a very, very emergent, nascent discourse in the Indian academy. I find that there is not so much work which has been done, not so much classroom teaching which is done in terms of the need to bring disability and marginalization to the foreground of academic discourse. So I can say that I'm particularly keen to listen to your presentation, and I would request you to begin your presentation on disability and marginalization. Thank you. Anil,
He has poor network, Tapan.
Oh, okay.
Because he is in
Sir.
the office,
Oh,
so poor network.
No, but sir's mic also is switched off. Can you just ask him to switch on
Anil,
it?
you have to unmute yourself. Anil, you have to unmute yourself.
Shall I call him? No. 1 second.
Yeah. Yes. So is it okay now?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear
We
me?
can hear you now. Yes, sir.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So good morning, everyone, and thank you, Tapan, and the conference committee of the Singh Evening College to give me, which is a day college now. It's nothing much to do with the evening, unless we say that the definitions of evenings and mornings are also merged, and the evening, which is a day college. Now, thank you for giving me this opportunity to be with you and to it is not the first time.
Brati, there's a problem with the connection.
I don't know. I think it is sir's pure network is poor. Looked like.
This is what that because he's in the office. I know.
Can somebody
Anil.
assist, sir? I think, sir, the mic should be near his face.
No. His network is poor.
Just give me a minute.
Oh, then
Give me a.
would it be better to join in from the?
Anil, can you hear us?
No, he's
Now, he
muted
had joined
himself.
from his mobile. Now I think that I can see it. Johnny Anil left. Tapan, he will rejoin.
Yeah, that is good. I think that is much better. Let him rejoin.
Yeah. But then that university having poor network now. Particularly that heads room.
On other occasions, he has joined from his office. For instance, on the Constitution Day event, he joined us from his office.
Yeah, but Tapan, it goes off and on. There is poor network, so that's why that this problem.
Okay.
Yes, what to do?
Should we go on to Crystal and then come back to Anil? What do you suggest, brother?
We can do that. I think we can do that. I'll message sir. है ना?
Message Anil if it's okay by him.
I'll just ask him. He's calling. He's calling.
Yeah. Okay.
Sir, are you having?
Anil is here. Anil, can you hear us? Anil, can you hear us?
Hear me? Can you hear me, Tapan?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear us from this side?
Yeah, I can hear you very clearly.
Yeah.
I can hear you, but the link keeps getting expired. There's something happening to the link.
So
but let's hope.
You give a green signal. Shall I begin?
Yes.
Okay. Brati, I am beginning. Brati?
Oh, yes, sir. Please begin.
Yeah.
Tapan, first let's check. Am I audible and visible clearly?
You are.
Okay now?
Yes, sir. You're audible, visible. Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Brati,
Thank
one
you.
clarification. What about the time frame now that we are beginning a little later?
So we have till 12:30, so no issues. The session goes up to 12:30, so we have time.
Okay.
We have time, no issues. The
I-
whole inaugural session is till 12:30, so you have time, no issues.
Anil, I had begun to introduce you and introduce your topic by saying that although we have been discussing issues of marginality with respect to class, caste, gender, race for some time, even in the Indian academy, I for one, and I said I could be underinformed or ill-informed, have not heard so much discussion about disability and marginalization within our classrooms and within our seminars and conferences, and I wondered whether you would agree with that, and if that is so, that this is not a politic which has been paid too much attention to as of now. It is still a discourse in its very, very nascent stage of focus. What could be done to bring it more into the foreground? That is my introduction. And Anil, we are really waiting, very eager to hear your point of view.
Yeah. So thank you, Tapan, and thank you very much to the conference committee of the Department of English, Dhyan Singh College, for giving me this opportunity to be with you this morning and to share my thoughts on an area of engagement which is dear to my heart, dear to my life, dear to my beliefs. If Tapan, I would begin with what you just said, that discussions on disability discourse, despite the fact that disability and marginality is something which is prevalent in Indian culture and ethos since ancient times, as I hope to show, it is something that has not been paid proper attention to in our academia, in our curriculum, so much so that when I joined the Department of English and introduced a course called Human Rights and Literature, which was an internal assessment course, IA course at the master's level, people and tried to then approach disability from that angle, realizing that a direct encounter with disability in systems may prove to be more difficult than trying to approach, which I also believe should be the case through the human rights rubric. A senior colleague asked me whether such engagement would at all be acceptable in the Department of English. Not many years ago, not even a decade ago, it was believed that disability studies is something which doesn't come in the domain of literary studies, or may not come in the domain of literary studies. We have moved on very far from that position, and I'm really happy about it. Happy because when I applied for a position at the Department of English, one of my commitments was that I would bring disability to the fore of academia at Delhi University. Today, when we have an disabilities and literature elective course at the undergraduate level, which is also coming in the 6th semester, incidentally, and also our syllabus has been approved by the oversight committee, so you can start working on that course among and many others which are in the 6th semester. So that was an aside. We now going to have, in fact, a core course on disability studies that literally represent the master's level. Many of our MPhil and PhD students are working on disability studies and literature, cinema. It's a long walk that we've friends. For the last 7 years. I am particularly happy that the department has been responsive, my colleagues have been supportive, positive, and enabling. The students and researchers have been forthcoming. It is in that context, perhaps, that the politics of marginality are the more important. As I was saying earlier, started looking after the rosters of the university. Growth was one of the first persons who met me as a nodal officer and from working on a roster with Dhyan Singh College, was one of the first institutions to appoint.
Aneja sir could switch off the video, maybe his network would work better.
The position.
Anil, there is a problem with your network.
which I encountered. Wait. I'll shift my position and see if something works better. Me now?
Yeah, why don't you speak?
Tapan, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can the others hear? I can hear Anil.
Anil, you can switch off your video, please. Network might improve.
Yeah, continue.
Yeah. Yeah, I've changed my position. Can you hear me better?
Yeah, we can hear you, Anil, now.
Raj understands the dynamics of this room much better because he spent 3 years here. So
Yes, sir. It's better, sir. It's better, much better.
Much better. Okay, good. So as we engage with this discussion this morning, it is not just that walk that we had in the departments of English of various colleges. Of course, the Dancing College is one college that is having this discussion today, but I may add
we are losing the voice again.
Yeah, there is poor network. So what can Anil do?
Department which has had such a discussion over the last 2 years. So total disability studies is not again. I'm surprised. I'm really surprised. I'm just standing at the center of the room now and hope that it works. Is it better now? Tapan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We also
Ratika,
can hear you, sir. Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yes, sir.
So okay. Yeah. So I become a centrist. I become a centrist. I come at the center of the room. So from wherever I can get network, at this point, let's see if I'm able to get it. Yeah. So the video is off. The video is off. Yeah, the video is off. So please don't mind that. Yes. So as I speak to you this morning, I wish to make 3 important points. One, that unlike many other marginalities, disability is to be viewed both as a local reality and as a global concern. And this is where, among many pointers, it differs from other marginalities. 2, disability is not just a question of providing opportunity. It's a question of providing appropriate environment, appropriate support. In other words, it's a much more continuing engagement if we need to ensure inclusion of persons with disabilities in our institutions and in our curricula. 3, disability in a way is a deliberately manipulated, negotiated construct in order to perhaps manage our own permeability and our own desire power for hegemony. It is not something that is there in the persons whom we call persons with disabilities. To point out my 3rd point first, that it is something that is constructed to manage our own permeability or to our own sense of hegemony or biopower. I'd like to quote from a well-known critic, writer, Judith Butler, and she writes, I have some difficulty organizing my notes now because I'm standing and holding the phone, but let's see if we can manage that. Well, yes, I think we should be able to do that. And so I quote from Judith Butler, who writes, give me a second. Yes, I don't have a table before me, so that's a bit of a challenge here. Everyone, and I quote of Interdependence, the Examined Life, and I quote, everyone, whether or not disabled, requires support for bodily activities from various kinds of things that are external to their bodies. Every body is permeable in the sense of being vulnerable to being impinged upon by others. People who violently target and victimize the disabled are managing their own permeability by abusing individuals who appear to be more dependent than most of the than more dependent than most and thus more vulnerable, and so on and so forth. Unquote. Similar views are echoed by Sartre and Foucault as well. Sartre, in Being and Nothingness, writes that I cannot be disabled without choosing to be disabled, and we give being to others by our consciousness. So the disability is constructed in the consciousness of those whom we consider as so-called non-disabled. The question is whether all of us or such persons who come in the category of non-disabled are really so. I particularly draw your attention to 24th March 2020, when people were going around their business as usual during the day, but by the time it was 8 p.m., things appeared to change, and we were told that we had only 4 hours to live a life that we had been used to. You all know what I'm referring to. And after that, as we were told to stay indoors, everybody rushed outside to the markets and other points because they wondered whether they will ever get the liberty. The life after that, the COVID period, is often regarded as what we call the new normal. Why is it the new normal? Because it's a life where we have experienced uncertainties, constraints, limitations, the need for support, and the need for finding alternative mechanisms to do activities which we took for granted. As I said in one of my webinars on COVID and disability, that this so-called new normal, as defined by me just now, and experienced by all of us in some degree or the other, is something persons with disability are used to from their early time. So what we call the new normal for ourselves, and we seem to glorify it, or we seem to debate and discuss it, as we seem to intellectualize it, and we seem to live it, is something persons with disabilities have been living from the early days. So who is disabled then? Are those people who regard this so-called new normal and new experience with many people, most people, majority of people in the world are finding difficult to negotiate as persons with disabilities, or those who have always negotiated and regarded as part of their life? The larger point I'm trying to make is that disability is a construct. When others had similar experiences, we regarded them as disabled. When we ourselves have the same experience, we call it the new normal. Why don't we call it disability experience? Why the new normal? Why this time we need to glorify that? So, disability is something not outside our life. And as I said earlier, it's a global phenomenon. Unlike some other marginalities, which are country specific or some countries specific. And therefore, the dimensions of disability are far wider in terms of numbers, in terms of impact, and in terms of the need to understand. Because most of us do not even need to understand what disability is. As said, as we did not understand disability and what we called earlier disability, we now term it as new normal. Not realizing that all of us in some form or other are persons with disabilities. As Judith Butler just said, everybody needs support for bodily activities from sources which are external to the body. And if everybody needs support for bodily activities from sources which are external to the body, then where is disability? Everybody is disabled in some way or other. Somebody may be short and may have difficulty, putting the bolt of the door, which is maybe very high, or closing a ventilator. Somebody may be very tall and may have difficulty in getting into a small car like Wagoner or Maruti 800. Disability is specific to individual and to context. It is not something that is absolute, objective, and clearly, tangibly definable. And therefore, I would argue that the concept of disability is ever changing. So, coming back to the point that disability is global and it has strong magnitude, let us see what is the magnitude of disability. According to the World Health Organization, which is a global body as we know, nearly 15% or around 1 billion persons of the world suffer from some kind of disability or the other. And this definition does not include everybody whom I call persons with disabilities, because everybody is deficient in bodily or intellectual functions, emotional functions, because now even psychosocial disabilities are also included. And if everybody is deficient in some respect, everybody is. But WHO doesn't think so. So they have put the number at 15%, which is nearly 1 billion people in the world are persons with disabilities, which, if you may realize, is nearly 2/3 of India's population, which is a vast country. So nearly 2/3 of India's population is equal to the world population of disability. This itself tells you the magnitude of the problem, the issue. I want it the problem. Certainly it's not a problem, but it's an issue. Number two, disability, unlike other marginality, requires, as I said, not just the opportunities, but also continuing sensitivity and support, which is often lacking. Today, we are very happy that an institution like the Alsing College is organizing this workshop, and everybody may be hopefully keen in listening on my thoughts, listening to my thoughts on disability. But in this very university, let me give you some examples of marginalization. There was a person now known as an eminent scholar. I would not give any name of individual's institution, but I will definitely point out the incidents. These are very fabulous actually. Who taught and got a gold medal in the master's programs of a particular university in the Department of Philosophy. That will tell many people who I'm talking about. Naturally then, it was not unreasonable for that individual to hope for a teaching appointment at a time when there was no net, there was no requirement for MPhil or no PhD, and MA degree was enough. I'm talking about the early 60s, 1960s. It was natural for a person who had been a brilliant scholar throughout, had been a gold medalist throughout, and had topped the university in the subject to hope for a teaching appointment. But he was not given teaching appointment, stating that while it may be fine for a person to study and talk, a visually could not teach. And we call ourselves enlightened Indian University. Professor V.P. Verma is the person I'm talking about, who went on to be the head of Department of Philosophy at our university, and a professor emeritus. This was the level of understanding and complacency as far as disability is concerned. At another university, a visually impaired person, again a topper at the master's level, was given appointment, but was offered a job, but not given appointment letter, because it was the selection committee could not believe that he could teach, so there was a 2 week monitoring in the classroom. Look at the level of humiliation. Has any of us, has anybody gone through this humiliation? That for 2 weeks you are monitored to demonstrate your skills, whether you can teach before you're given an appointment letter. That person also went on to be the head of department of that particular university. In our university itself, a visually impaired person was not interviewed by a principal stating that when I don't want to appoint a disabled person, why even interview him for an ad hoc position? This is Delhi University at one time, talking about 1980. Things no doubt have drastically changed today. Today, I said we are talking about disability, marginality. There is reservation. There are rosters in place. 4% reservation is provided. There's obligations, principles, if they create difficulty, or institutions, I would say, create difficulty in providing employment opportunities. There are grievances, channels open to individuals. But the point I'm trying to make is, this appears to indicate as if things have changed. But have things really changed? Marginality still continues, despite the fact that we are supposed to be an entitled educational institution or the universities. In most universities, vacancies meant for persons with disabilities are vacant. In most universities, including some institutions maybe of our own university, even when we provide reservation to students with disabilities, the support systems, accessible material, accessible buildings are missing. All these, in my view, are forms of discrimination and marginality. Marginality is not just an intellectual concept. It should not be understood as an intellectual concept. It is not something to be studied in journals, books, in libraries, in classrooms. No. Marginality is to be lived. It needs to be experienced. It needs to be negotiated with complete cooperation and involvement of those who have been victims of marginality. It is not something other that this whole idea, which Derrida talks about binaries, must give way to the idea of interdependence. And therefore, marginality is not something that's only bookish, it is experiential. And any attempt, and there have been sometimes attempts on the part of persons to understand disability purely in academic terms, leaving out the experiential part, to my view, such attempts may strongly run the risk of being counterproductive. Now the question arises, these are some recent examples that I have given. The question arises, is marginality in the context of disability something new? Is it something that we are talking today, or is it something that has its roots somewhere else? My take on that would be that though it is a construct by those who are trying to negotiate their own permeability and try to create a hegemonic society, marginality and discrimination in the context of disability is something which is there from the ancient times. I often give this example, and some of you may have heard this, the story of Mahabharata. The question arises whether Mahabharata would ever have existed, whether the battle of Kurukshetra would have taken place if Dhritarashtra was made the king instead of Pandu in the first place itself. And then the question is, why was Dhritarashtra not made the king? In fact, Bhishma got up to make Dhritarashtra, crown Dhritarashtra. It was Vidur who stopped. And why did Vidur stop Dhritarashtra? Let me see if I can put my chair, because this punishment of standing and talking at the center of the room doesn't seem to be working for long.
Yes, sir. Please sit down.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, sir. You're audible. Perfectly audible.
You tell me when it goes off, because
No, I mean, you are audible.
You're perfectly audible.
So, so it is Vidur who stopped Bhishma from crowning this.
Can't hear him.
Again, your voice is broken, Anil.
Can't hear you.
A person could not.
Yes, can hear you. Yes.
Yeah. So, and okay, even there was no source or no authority to dictate the discourse that a visually impaired person could not rule, yet the entire so-called wise people of the court accepted it. This is our sensitivity and our understanding of life. Chalo maan liya, Pandu was made the king. But after Pandu's abdication, my point is, why was Dhritarashtra again made the king? Why did he become, did he regain his sight? Was he not now visually impaired? Why was he given the kingship? If a visually impaired person could not become king earlier, and therefore Pandu was made the king, a visually impaired person could not become the king even after Pandu was not available. So why was Dhritarashtra made the king? The reason was the kingship could not go out of the family. So that construct became more important than the construct of disability. And therefore Dhritarashtra was made the king. Now, this is where the discrimination lies. It is not disability per se was the reason. It is the way a certain group of people, which unfortunately is often the majority group when we talk of marginality, wanted things to be, wanted a certain order to be. Now, what is the rule of kingship? The eldest son of the king becomes the king. That was the rule of kingship. No doubt on that. If the eldest son of the king becomes the king, Pandu was not the king. Dhritarashtra was the king. A question could be asked from the Devin's point of view. If Dhritarashtra was the king, whatever the causes may be, it was Dhritarashtra the king now, would his son not have the right to become the king? I'm not trying to question any established interpretation of any epic or any religious or mythical or cultural point of view. I'm just trying to point out, which I always do, that there is a critical lens available to read a text from a disability point of view, also which we often do. This mistake has been made not in the context of Mahabharata only, in many texts that we teach so often, and we are so familiar with, I will name few of those, we still try not to read those texts from a disability point of view, therefore also exercising another kind of marginality. The same oversight which people at the time of Mahabharata committed by ignoring this Rashtra on two counts. First, by not making him the king, and second, by at least not even examining the claim of Duryodhana, because let's imagine a context where Dhritarashtra was not visually impaired, and he would have been made the king over Pandu earlier itself, in the first instance itself. Would Duryodhana not have the right to kingship then? Would there not be some justification in the claim? But so, my take on the text is, one, the reason that Mahabharata took place was because there was discrimination on grounds of disability. But that anger often has not been taken into account, as in case of many other texts that strongly deal with disability, but we as academics do not look at it from those points of view. Gulliver's Travels, for instance, is a text which is a strong disability text. The whole idea of normative that we are so much concerned with, we call ourselves being a part of the new normal. Issue is, was there something called the old normal? And who defines normalcy? Who defines the normative? Because discrimination and marginality always takes place in the context of the set notion of the normative. If there is no normative, then there is no ground for discrimination. And we have an established notion, right or wrong, I'm not getting to that right now, of what is normative. The first author, in my view, I'm not counting the Renaissance literature, there are also instances, but the first author, in my view, who questioned the idea of normative is Swift, in Gulliver's Travels, written as early as in 1726.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you wind up in a little while?
Another two things.
Yeah, sure.
Another two things. Yeah. So, what happens in Gulliver's Travels? Then Gulliver is so-called normal person when he sets out on his voyage, but in front of the Lilliputian, He is helpless. And when he goes to the country of dropping net, he himself has any put here. So what is normal Gulliver? What is our concept of normal human being? What is the concept of the normal body is something which is strongly interrogated. We could discuss this point further. There are other texts like Jainaya. Tapan talked about the Indian context. Premchand's Ranbhumi, for instance, is a strong disability text, has not been seen from that point of view. If you come to diaspora literature, Rita describes clear night of the day. One of my chapters recently published talks about Bhakti Mukherjee's wife also as a disability text. Rohinton, Idra Sinha, all these are strong disability texts, but not been read from that. Look at the world rather than in those people whom we regard as marginalized, and they are in that state because we, due to our own disability, have not been able to. The problem is with those who regard themselves non-disabled and not with those who regard them disabled. As for the policy frameworks are concerned, those are strongly in place. We have the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, we have reservation, we have accessibility. How much of it is we are lying? And who is going to realize? So what have we done? So when we talk about marginality, and if you really want to do something about marginality in the context of disability, this is a good way. But as Sartre talks in his essay called Why Right, published in What is Literature, which was as early as 1947, that understanding and discussion virtually has no meaning unless it needs what he called call for action. It is that call for action that I urge you to take if we really want to act on marginality in the context of disability. Mere discussions, papers, presentations would not help. These would help. These may be the beginning, the first steps, but without the call for action. So we have to look around us. Are we okay? Is our understanding of people around us fine? Is our understanding of ourselves is fine? Because as I said, everybody is disabled. Unless we recognize our own disability, we will never be able to understand the disability of others. And once we recognize our own, our sensitivity towards ourselves in someone else's shoes must be to respect.
Okay, thank you, Anil. Can you hear me, Anil?
Yes, yes.
Anil, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much. That was indeed, in my opinion, a perspective. At least I was not aware of the perspective being thrown on disability as in the context of the new normal. I really learned a lot. In fact, I might go ahead to say that I'm leaving this particular, after this particular paper, I'm a sadder and wiser man. Sadder because there's so much of literature which I have read, but I have not read from the disability point of view. Canonical texts, Mahabharata, Jainaya, Gulliver's Travels, I've read all of them in my time, but not from the disability point of view. I'm sadder for that, and I'm wiser too, because now me, and I'm sure many people who are in the room, who are at the seminar, will know how to approach text differently from the disability perspective. Thank you very much. Now, we go on to the final presentation of the session, which is Professor Crystal Devadasan, and among all the titles of the presentations to be made at this session, this very, very provocative title. It's the limits of. I was holding on to questions because of lack of time. Vrati, what do you say? We can, before Crystal's paper, can we entertain a few questions?
As of now, there are no questions. So we'll take them together,
Okay,
sir?
okay, fine. If it's fine by everybody, fine by the organizers, we'll have questions on Crystal's paper and Anil's paper together. Anil, is that okay? Okay,
Yes, yes,
let
okay.
me go ahead. Okay, thank you. Go back to Crystal's paper. I found the title among the titles of all the presentations to be made at this session. I found it very intriguing. The limits of visuality. Do children constitute a class? And I can't help the temptation of asking Crystal a question in the process of introducing the topic. In my readings on class, working class movements, class movements, I always thought that class needs the formation of class needs class consciousness. So could I begin by asking you, even before you started on your paper, do children have class consciousness? Thank you. And sorry for that
No,
unconventional
that's wonderful. That's a very
introduction.
helpful lead in, and I will take that. Just one query. Broti, is the PowerPoint up and running? So may we start?
We'll start off the moment you give us the signal. We'll start. Shall we start it?
Please.
Yeah.
Um, Lovely. Thank you very much. So let me begin then with a very solid area of difficulty within my title, and I think also outside of the title within the field as a whole. This question with by referring to a remark that has to do with the original abstract, the concept note that the conference committee sent us. It was that quotation, or it was the reference to Parks and Marginal Man. And I noticed that in that very old, though not dated essay, there is the sense that marginality has to do with migration, with travel, with displacement, with reconfiguration, reconstitution, remake. So, moving then to what, keeping this in mind, that marginality and migration of one kind or another are somehow linked to each other. If we may have the next slide, the point that I want to begin with is that, if we could have the next slide, that the representation of children in fiction in India is heavily indebted, and the debt is repeatedly acknowledged. I should say this by Pullak Biswas, by Shankar, by Lakshman. Their indebtedness to late Victorian illustrators, such as the Tenniel of Alice in Wonderland, such as Shepherd, as we will see in a bit, from Winnie the Pooh, and the Shepherd also of the Railway Children. There is a sense in which the heavy indebtedness, if we could have the next slide, please, the indebtedness of Indian illustrators to kind of staticity of representations of children by late Victorian illustrators is very, very marked. So, for example, when we look at the way, say, first Alice in Wonderland, and then after Alice in Wonderland, when we move forward to The Wind in the Willows. The Wind in the Willows is very much a cusp text, a text that moves us from the Victorian into the Edwardian era. It is important here for our purpose, I think, that for the first time in the history of visual representation, the idea that A, childhood is a kind of a golden age in which all of us are invested. B, that along with this, as it were, um, valorization of childhood, there is also something that is terrifying, something that is beyond beyond the scope of ordinary rational understanding. And this sense then that childhood may be golden, but it is always located in the past, because to imagine it in the present is very much more distressing, is very much more disturbing than one can think of. This is, I would say, a sense that is mediated by illustrators in the early 20th century in England. If you think about the way in which both Winnie the Pooh in the Shepherd illustrations and subsequently Shepherd's work on the railway children comes to mind. See, there is always a sense, and please um, do not particularly worry to engage with the illustrations if they are not immediately available. If we could move to the next slide. There is also a sense in which all the conclusions of these texts, whether rendered in a literary manner or whether rendered in a visual manner, there is always a sense in which of happiness goes hand in hand with enclosure. There is, in other words, a very strong protectionism that is offered to the representation of children. And with the slide that we now have on our screen, please don't please let it run a bit, that's fine. You will notice that the representation of children, visual or literary, in the early 20th century is a representation that sort of pushes them up as markers of prosperity. Now, the markers of prosperity investment is a very strong investment made very specifically by Britain through the First and well into the Second World War. The idea that whatever happens in with regard to their need to convert children into soldiers of empire in the colonies, or to send them out to form part of the thin red line of heroes on the battlefront in both the First and Second World Wars, there is the insistence on the shaping of children in a state of childhood, as being minimally middle class. Linked to this, they are almost always given to us in boarding school uniforms. So again, there's a very strong sense of prosperity and childhood going hand in hand. And and most of all, the sense of will and willful delight. Now, why I say this is when we think about the children in these stories, and we have all of them experienced this, we have all of us experienced this when we have either had these stories read to us or read them ourselves in our childhood. There is the sense that there are two kinds of what I will call, with some regret, two kinds of happiness. One, the kind of laughter, and this is what you will see in the first of the little slides over here. The sense that it's fun to laugh when someone pulls a chair out from the fattest boy in class, Billy Bunder. That's Frank Richards giving us his famous five, laughing at the overweight youngster who falls to the ground. How funny it is for the child who falls to the ground, the child who is victimized on account of appearance, on account of perhaps a slight dip in prosperity, a slight dip in intellectual development. Those are things that we think about later. But, and again, with even Enid Blyton's, or rather Joseph Abbey's representations of Enid Blyton, there is the sense that children must laugh. Children must have their pocket money, children must have their chocolate biscuits, children must have their little black Scotty with them if they're out of class. Of course, as I said, if they are in school, they must have their caps, their blazers, their ties, all markers of prosperity. Now, the first person, to my knowledge, I'm happy to be corrected, the first person to disturb this idea that to represent children is to represent prosperity is actually Lakshman when he comes to work. Strangely enough, yes, on Swami and Friends, but not instantly, because remember the first edition of Swami and Friends that is taken forward by Graham Greene comes out without illustrations. This is a later edition for World's Classics. So it's not instantly with Swami and Friends, so I have shown that picture here first of all. It is, yes, with Swami and Friends, also with a particular advertisement campaign that Lakshman develops for Asian Paints. The idea of the barefoot child. The child who is barefoot, the child who falls asleep over his books, the child who usually seems to function in a state only of semi comprehension. So, that sense, the sense that a child, or more precisely childhood, may be a marker not of prosperity but of social change, of social disaster, really, very often, bordering on adversity. That is a sense that Lakshman brings. And you will notice that if you play off, say, the appearance of children in the books, the illustrators with whom Lakshman is familiar, to whom he acknowledges the dead, and the kind of illustration that Lakshman gives us. The boy Swami does not come from a poor family. Quite the contrary, his father is a member of a club who swings a cheerful tennis racket, who gets into a car without the slightest social stumble. So it's not so much a matter of class distinction or of economic and social distinction. It is a marker of how the public sees its own children, or how Lakshman slash R.K. Narayan wants us to look at the child hero. Not as someone enjoying a jolly good laugh. No, not as someone with a tuck box. Childhood is to know a certain kind of adversity. And when Lakshman goes on to create in the late 50s, I think 1958, the Gattu sequence of advertisements for Asian Paints. The little boy who is a painter, it's a campaign that was subsequently given up by Asian Paints because it sort of um, valorized child labor. I want to I want here to think a little about the way in which the cheerful grin, the tousled hair, the boy with the paintbrush in his hand. We've met all these tropes ad nauseum, ad infinitum through our reading of late 19th, early 20th century Anglo-American fiction. Tom Sawyer painting the fence. Richmal Crompton's William with tousled hair. The big grin from Richmal Crompton, from Frank Richards. We're thoroughly familiar with these things. The sense that the child may be a cheerful outlaw. But Gattu is not a cheerful outlaw. Gattu is a kid who earns his living, probably by painting. And that is a major turnaround for illustrative idiom in India. Is this how we see ourselves? Is this how we see the kids we deal with? And now, if we could move on to the next slide. One of the things that happens very markedly through the 70s is not merely that India is struck by a, mm, a sequence of social disasters, but that, and again, this is a first time, that Indian illustrators begin to think about using children as markers this time of the complete breakdown, the complete collapse of the Indian state. So the famines of the late 70s, which recall the worst excesses of the colonial regime. We have Vijayan, for example, giving us his little boy who walks 10 miles each way with his mother for one pot of drinking water. We have the kid again with his father, his peasant farmer. It is now Vijayan representing Kalahandi, representing to us not just that the rains have failed, but the state has failed, that all mechanisms of coping, public and private, have completely given up. He gives us the kid and his father waving the flag, the national flag, not to show anger against the republic, but to show the enormous, hideous, tragic irony of the fact that they remember the republic that has forgotten them. And time and time again, Vijayan goes on pointing out that about the child. He says, "My child is real. He lives on boiled grass. He does not get very much water." And yet, Vijayan will use the child and the child's a father who is a farmer, to discuss bofas, to discuss kalahandi, to discuss the way in which so-called parliamentary democracy is actually totally non-representative. And this sense that illustrators need time and again to remind us of the vulnerability of childhood, if we could have the next slide, please, is very much an indication of the way in which not so much children are becoming conscious of their themselves as a class, but illustrators are becoming conscious, for better or for worse, of the need to represent children to children in a very particular way. If we could have the next slide, please. Vishwajyoti Ghosh, on the subject of the Peshawar school bomb attack, the 2014 attack. You will recall that at that time, it is not just that terrorists bomb a school in Pakistan, it is the first time that there is actual collaboration between the visual satirists of both countries to come up with a common comic strip to sensitize children to two things. First, the horror of a world which, when they enter their classroom, they find no children like themselves anymore. Ghosh does this, Shreyas Naware also does this. But the interesting thing about Ghosh is not just the collaborative approach, but his insistence, if we could have that slide, please, his insistence that um, there is still a certain beauty in the world, a beauty in a world for which children have to be taught, yes, this is how you are going to enter a classroom. Yes, your satchel, which hitherto has been a marker of a cheerful, carefree childhood, is now going to be within the crosshairs of an AK-47, within the crosshairs of a terrorist bomb attack. And yet, that this is still a world in which you have to be happy, you have to enjoy. And why this is important, and yes, I will wind up quickly. Why this is important is, see, post 47, there is a huge investment by the then government of India in the construction of childhood. The particular quotation that I've put here on the slide is straight from the core effort to build up the Children's Book Trust, the National Book Trust, and illustrators such as Shankar, such as Pulak Biswas, are repeatedly called on to work out for children what it is to be a child in India. But if you think about it, and if we could now move on to two slides down the road, if we think about it, when we look at the kind of writing for children and the drawing for children that we have the, if we could move on with the slide, please. If we take a look at the at the representations, thank you, the representations, say, in the work that comes out of NVT, out of CBT for children, the repeated positioning of the construction of the king always as a kshatriya with the crown on his head, the priest always a Brahmin, always shown as renouncing the world with a long flowing beard, the young woman almost always being dragged along by her parent. It is unsurprising, I put it to you, it is unsurprising that with this kind of illustrative idiom, we should have well into our times, both in the gardener in the wasteland and even in segments of Himayan, this question of the need to reflect what is the kind of childhood we are creating for people. If you look at this excerpt from the gardener in the wasteland, it's not only that the child who breaks a neighbor's window is called you son of a chamar. It is not just an easy mapping of caste onto childhood saying this is the double bind. No, it is a much more disturbing thing than that. To think that it is necessary to justify the continuance of a theme of discrimination because it is happening before our eyes, not in a marginalized part of town, but in South Extension, one of the very, very upmarket parts of Delhi. Yeah, to think that illustrators see the need, or the illustrator and the author see the need for discussing childhood as a way of opening up not just the pastness of the Jyotiba Phule story, but its all too horrifying presentness. And even if you take a look at the next slide, if we could move on very quickly, the question of that terrible slap that the neighbor lands on the child's cheek. Again, it is
Sorry,
not so
sorry
much.
to interrupt, Crystal. A few more minutes.
Yeah, nearly done. It's not just the resounding slap. It is also the sense that people need to explain. This is why we want to illustrate things. And what is the idiom that they have to fall back on? The idiom of DC Comics. And they realize that. They realize that terrible limitation themselves. Because see, and this is the point that another graphic text, All Quiet in Bikaspuri, will make, if we could have the next slide. See, this terrible sense, it's not a matter of childhood humiliation alone. It is the sense that if that this is what gives rise to very much more disturbing predicaments in adulthood. The child who is called who is abused in class in All Quiet in Bikaspuri. If we could just move back, please, one slide. The child who is abused in terms of his caste origin grows up to not just found a millennial city because he cannot bear being called the dirty one in class, the scummy creature. He goes on to build the city of his dreams. And what happens when he builds the city of his dreams in Gurgaon? There is no water. There is no escape, whether from Bikaspuri, whether in Gurgaon. There is no escape from this, which is why, and this is, I promise, the concluding slide. When illustrations are done for works not just around children, but works that children will be shown even before they can read, how does one illustrate children? Dance of the Wild, which is the final slide. The child dances her clothes off. She cannot understand why she should not be in a state of nature. And this big question, how do we address mental disability? Do we say attention deficit disorder? Do we say we will talk about it later? If we talk about it later, how do we illustrate in time present? I hope I have said enough to explain that childhood may be a state out of which we migrate. Childhood may be a class that cannot be called a class because it does not have the same members in it and they don't know that they're sitting in it. Nonetheless, marginalization is something that needs to be looked at, ventilated, and most certainly redressed in this area. Thank you very much for your courtesy. Thank you for showing the slides.
Thank you, Crystal. And not only did I learn a lot from your talk, and thank you for answering the question which I posed right at the beginning of your talk. Now
Yes.
I'm going to open up the session as a whole, but particularly the last two presentations, Anil's presentation and Crystal's presentation, for questions and comments. Is Anil there? Anil? Yeah, Anil
Yes,
is there.
yes, but
Yes, he's there.
So, questions, comments, observations on the two papers and the earlier speakers also, but particularly these two speakers. Anil, may I begin with a question to you?
yeah, please.
Yeah. You know, I was listening with great concern about the examples of marginalization in Delhi University, you know, real life marginalization that people with disabilities have faced in the classroom, outside the classroom, at the point of appointment. I was listening with great concern. I did not know, I knew a couple of these instances, I have come to know, but certainly not all of them, and the extent of the humiliation that people with disabilities have experienced. I was thinking, now times are changing, and the state is on the retreat from education, higher education, as also from employment sectors, the corporations, there is privatization, and there is no legislation about, you know, accommodation of people with disabilities in education and employment, which is funded by the private sector. What happens? Are we going back to square one then, or worse?
Um, two things happen. One, even when the systems, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes,
Tapan,
I can hear
am I
you.
audible?
Anil, I can hear you. Anil, I can hear you. Can everybody?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
I cannot ask.
So you are audible.
I cannot. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, fine. As I was saying, I cannot ask whether I'm visible because I switched off my video to save the data so that there's no difficulty in audio. Yes,
No problem.
even when the systems are in the government hands, and it's after around 75 years of India's independence, 26 years after the Persons with Disabilities Act, things have hardly changed. There is discrimination and marginality of persons with disabilities in every institution, even of Delhi University. I will go so far as to say that in some form or other, we all do it.
Okay.
Even when we teach a student in classroom, when we write on the blackboard or our PowerPoint and see the projectors, how often do we read out the text? If there's a hearing impaired child in the class, how often does teacher provide additional notes or their sign language interpreters? They are not. So these are very subtle forms of marginality which are already, or even now there. Now, as far as the government moving away from the education and the employment sector is concerned, happily, we have what we call the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. India is also a signatory to an international document called United Nations Declaration on the or Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
Okay.
These two documents go beyond education and employment, beyond reservation. The larger points there are accessibility, the principle of equality, what we call reasonable accommodation, which are applicable even to the private body. It's not that these are applicable, only these are rights. A right is a right irrespective of whether you are a government or a private body. Number one.
Your voice has got suspended.
Number two, I do see some not done by the government.
Yeah.
The government fund.
There's a problem with your voice, Anil. Anil, the connectivity is low.
I'm just trying to move from one place to another like a.
Yeah, please move.
So let's see. Yes.
Are there any questions?
So I would say one thing good in private sector is the emphasis on skills or. Can others hear me, or is only Tapan who can't hear? Or
we can hear you, but your voice is breaking a little.
The voice.
Others can.
Yeah, it's my room. It's my room. Yeah. So because emphasis on talent, skills, and outcomes in the private sector. And the belief is that persons with disability do not lack anything. They only lack opportunities and support, will not be an issue there. Because they are fully capable of performing. Many of us came to the employment without reservation. And many people, when there was no reservation, have done very well for themselves. So reservation is not the only means of giving equity, it's an important means. But surely emphasis on development of talents, providing resources, giving proper and equal opportunities in the real sense of the word, because private sector in my view outcome driven, result driven, and they value anyone who delivers. And in my view, persons with disability can strongly deliver better than others. There should not be much of a problem on that ground.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Tapan.
Yeah.
I have one observation with Crystal's paper.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Crystal, thank you for, that's such a very, that's enlightening and nice, the presentation. Crystal, I am the real child of Kalahandi, so thank you for bringing this, the idea of Kalahandi. The one thing I just wanted to, that I ask you about the vision, because there is, that what I saw toward the right is peasant, that child celebrating father, and child celebrating the, that republic, maybe, that hoisting national flag. Peasant is a neutral term, that peasant is also misnomer, because it could be, that rich farmer, poor farmer, that of course the on the face of it, the picture seems to be like, the poor. On the other hand, the Kalahandi child is a girl child, that. So two things I just wanted to ask you. One is, that what would be your comments, particularly on vision about this, the term peasant, the criticality of, that the term peasant. And number two, the child who is also a girl has meaning or triple burden, no? Because she's carrying a pot, that probably traveling far, that kilometers, maybe, as we are reminded, but writers like Anupama Rao in Caste and Gender, that a Dalit child is no more, that happy child, that because they have to travel kilometers, some kilometers, to collect water and fuel in order to, that help the family of Dalit household. So what would be your comments, maybe, that just a, it is a kind of, throwaway kind of, that observation. I wanted not to ask you, but just provoke you, maybe.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, about the term, that was an amazingly insightful kind of response, and it has set me thinking. First, the term peasant. It is an unhappy term. It is a term that Bijayan uses repeatedly. When asked about it, he says that he uses this because he is looking at, among other things, the exercise of land redistribution, whether through violent or non-violent means, that he dates from Stalin's work in the then Soviet Union. And he continues, therefore, to use this term peasant farmer, peasant revolt, to signal a sense of his communist leanings, which he says were very strong at one time with regard to the movement of land redistribution. Secondly, he also uses the term to signal not just its inadequacy, but his own inadequacy, because there comes a time when he feels that however much he writes or however much he draws, he is not going to bring about any kind of a change in a social or in the social order, because he says he consistently wishes to work through non-violence, and yet violence seems to him to be the only thing that will change society. So it is a marker of an affiliation, and also of disappointment and anger with that affiliation. Secondly, about the Kalahandi child. Uh, yes, this is the one time that, to my knowledge, that Bijayan uses a girl child. He does not actually discuss this, strangely, very much. He does talk about the reality of the children that he uses, but it is usually the boy child whom he uses. And time again, when he uses the term child rather than boy or girl. So, for instance, when he says, my child is real, my child lives on, on boiled grass, my child lives below the hideous metaphor of the poverty line. So that is as much as I can say on that subject. Vijayan tends to be, I think, Raj, a somewhat disappointed person toward the end of his career. He does not therefore speak quite as much about the evolution of his style as perhaps we would benefit from. That is what I would say. But about
Thank you.
Mahatma Gandhi, he is unfailingly scathing in his representations of it as an ongoing colonial crisis, also as the other face of Bofors.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen.
Rusty,
I have a question to Crystal ma'am, if I may ask.
yes,
Hello
yeah.
ma'am, I'm Alyagiri, Faculty Department of English, Darjeeling Degree College.
Alia, can you be
Yeah. So according to Dennis Potter, the detective fiction are constructed backward. So in most of the detective fiction, the cause of crime or the psychological abnormality of the criminal is related to childhood experiences. Now, a subtle formation of a class. The idea that a person in question was not just segregated or marginalized, but was also made to accept that he or she is not normal. So, ma'am, what do you think about the adverse effect of the class consciousness that a child is forced to imbibe in a certain manner, because crime is always related to adulthood, but the cause of crime is related to childhood experiences?
I think this is the last question we can take because we will run late into the hello.
Yeah, okay.
This is a very sad and a disturbing thought. I will try to answer it as much as it falls within my competence. My understanding of the larger piece of writing from which this extract was taken is that it deals primarily with the kind of work that comes out of the Anglo American context in detective fiction, and more recently, what I will very loosely call the Scandinavian context. My concern, I do not dispute that doesn't mean I dispute the extract. I totally stand with it. My concern, though, with the Indian scenario is twofold. First, the investment by the government after 47 in the construction of a happy childhood. And secondly, the insistence, even in studies from overseas that come in today, that most Indian children are happy children. That is why, while I completely agree that sources of psychosocial disturbance should be probed are related to childhood, and the forcing of marginality down the throat of a child, All Quiet in Dikaspuri is a very good example of that. Nonetheless, that is an area that requires, I would say, more study.
Okay. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, all the scholars who made the presentations. It's been a very, very productive session as far as I'm concerned, and I've been on the chair. I've listened to each and every word of the presentations, and I must say I've learned a lot. I would like to thank the organizers for organizing such a fruitful seminar, and I wish them a continuity of more fruitful sessions in the 2 days to come. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I now invite our teacher in charge, Professor Abha Singh, to give the official vote of thanks for this session.
Unmute, madam.
Okay.
Unmute yourself, Ava, madam.
Yeah. Okay, sir. It's a great pleasure, and I deem it a great honor to, see all of you on the Alsing College platform. So, all my esteemed speakers, Pavan Kumar Sharma, the Alsing College entire colleagues, students, and well-wishers. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude to sincere vision and constant support in appreciation facilitating the plenary session and for meticulously highlighting the theme of the conference, to bringing together the various topics on marginality that our plenary speakers have presented to us. Sir, we are indeed very fortunate to have a wise and valued member of the academic community chair and very first session of our conference. I must then mention our deep appreciation and sense of appreciation to Professor Shamishta Panja for an invigorating and thought-provoking talk on Is Feminism Alive or Dead in India? Gender continues to be one of the bases of marginality in societies around the world and in the country. And her talk had allowed us to assess and critically think about the way forward. Thanks and gratitude to Professor Rajkumar for his talk on caste and marginality, where he has expressed everything which was full of sensitivity and adeptness. Professor Rajkumar had made a commendable contribution to the study and understanding of caste structure in academic circles. And it is our good fortune that we could have him as one of the speakers in the plenary session. I'm very grateful to Professor Anil Aneja, head of the Department of English, University of Delhi, for enlightening a talk on disability and marginality, an important topic of focus in the conference. While disability studies have garnered much attention in the academic discussion in the recent years, disabled person and their narrative life experiences still remain invisible in the public sphere. A big thank you, Professor Aneja, for helping us and making us understand and how to gain the deeper understanding of the disability. I would also like to express our thanks to Professor Crystal Dawson for a very creative and interesting talk on the limit of visuality, or do children constitute a class? Her talk was really very provocative, and it has provoked us to re-look into the way we read the text and how the children representation of their consciousness and experiences often remain in the periphery of discussion. Thank you, Professor Devadasan, for helping us realize the blind spot that lends to marginalized. Thank you, esteemed speakers, for your immeasurable and valuable contribution to have a kick-started the conference on a high note. Thanks to the convener, Bhuti Biswas, thanks to co-convener Madhuri Chawla, and entire faculty members. Without their cooperation, nothing could be possible. And with these words, I would like to conclude my vote of thanks and wish everyone present over here a successful and enlightening conference further. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all and all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Thanks all.
I think
It
thank
was
you all
all
Thank you
admins,
so much.
professors,
we
luminaries
Thank you, everyone.
that you have
are
come
so
and made
fortunate
our
to get you
plenary
over here.
session so thought-provoking, so enlightening. Thank you, professors.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all, and for being there with us. Because what marginality is, we can face because we are also on the periphery, as they are saying, evening college. So we also have lived this reality, and we
Yeah,
are every day
yeah.
contesting this reality
True.
that yes, we are rethinking the marginal. Thank you all, and since we are running late, I hope to see you physically later in the next conference. Thank you. And we will start joining for the next two parallel sessions.
Yeah.
Those are of the teachers who are presenting. Please join your sessions. And others who are coordinating and chairing the sessions, do please join your sessions, which are already given in the schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, Brody. Thank you.
See, there are one session will
Thank
be using the same link. So if you want to join the session on cast, stay on in the session itself. Stay tuned. The other session is on disability. If you're interested in the disability session, please join the parallel link, which has been given in the schedule.
Hello.